Nuclear arms allegations against Iran and Middle East war zones are on the Jonathan Manthorpe's current international affairs radar. 4 Iranian nuclear scientists have been assassinated in the last 2 years in Iran. It is my pleasure to welcome Jonathan Manthorpe, seasoned international affairs journalist, foreign correspondent, back to Studio 4 to tell us more. I say well-seasoned journalist you are.
Finally seasoned.
Finally seasoned journalist you are. How long have you been doing this, international affairs?
Since the mid-70s.
Mm-hmm. Posted where?
Europe, Africa, Asia, and then various jaunts around other bits of the globe, yeah.
So as you watch what's happening today in Iran, the allegations about nuclear weapons, and they say nay, and we say yay.
Well, we've actually had Stephen Harper today saying he thinks they're lying and that they certainly do have a nuclear weapons program, which we all know, you know. We all know they've got a nuclear weapons program.
We sure do. I haven't seen it, but I suspect it's not just about nuclear power.
Yeah. Well, there are all sorts of things coming together, Fanny, at the moment. And we've got this new raft of sanctions, which the Congress, the American Congress created and pushed through at the end of last year, and which Barack Obama signed into law on, I think, December 31st. And now those will come into operation over the next few months. And they are very, very important. They're probably the most serious sanctions against the Iran regime so far. What they say is that any country buying oil from Iran cannot have dealings with any financial institutions in the US. And so this has put, you know, allied countries like South Korea, like Japan, which buys significant, Japan is, I think, the second largest buyer of oil from Iran. This has really put them in a spot because you've got a choice between doing business with the US or doing business with Iran. And the choice is pretty simple. Even China, which disapproves of these sanctions, Wen Jiabao, the premier of China, has been scurrying around the Middle East in the last few days looking for alternative sources. Everybody recognizes they're going to have to at least drop the amount of oil they import from Iran.
China disapproves of these sanctions because...
Well, they don't approve of interference in the internal workings of governments. They don't approve of sanctions anyway. I mean, not least, of course, because they figure quite rightly that they could be the target of sanctions themselves. Indeed, they were after the Tiananmen in 1989. So China just doesn't like sanctions as a method of putting pressure on governments. But they're having to fall in line. This has the potential to cause internal upheaval in Iran more than anything else that has happened so far.
And I read recently that Iran is warning its Arab neighbors about their use of oil.
Yeah. Well, you know, what Iran would like to do now, because just a couple of numbers, 80% of Iran's foreign reserve currency comes from oil sales. 50% of government revenues come from oil sales. So a serious hit at this is really going to destabilize this government. And so what they're trying to do is to drive up oil prices, and hence the whole business of closing the Strait of Hormuz, which is the mouth of the Persian Gulf, and about, depends whose numbers you believe, but about 20%, a fifth of the world's oil travels through there on its way to market. So this would have a very, very serious effect on the price of oil, raise it enormously if the Iranians did close the Strait of Hormuz.
So the Iranians are threatening barricade.
Yeah, and they could do it easily. They could do it.
Trade of oil, or the flow of oil, and they could do this easily.
Now,
Dare they?
Well, that's the whole issue, because actually, of course, it would end up hurting them in the end more than it would hurt anybody else. And their internal situation is much less stable than other people. But, you know, things go wrong. Iran has 2 navies. It has a conventional navy, which is a leftover from the Shah and which is old and pretty predictable and not very dangerous at all. But then you've got these wretched Revolutionary Guards with a lot of high-speed motorboats, with mines, with missiles and rockets, and they are a very unpredictable crew. And you might get an overly eager, commander freelancing, and the whole thing can blow up very, very quickly. So it's a tender situation.
And the European Union weighs in how? I know they've threatened sanctions. Have they put them in place?
No, probably next week they're going to impose similar sanctions to the U.S. Now, this is going to, of course,
to Iran.
To Iran. This will on Iran. This will increase the pressure. Now, these sanctions are interesting because the White House insisted on writing into this law before it was signed. The White House was not in favor of these sanctions, I have to say, but they managed to get it altered a bit so that Obama has got the discretion to lessen the sanctions on other countries. One, if it's considered in the U.S. national interest, security interest to do so, and B, if those countries significantly reduce their oil imports from Iran. So, you know, countries like Japan, South Korea, and others will be looking to at least significantly reduce their oil imports from Iran. So, and the Europeans, I think, are going to follow with some similar sanctions.
So is this international showdown on the nuclear program in Iran because of everybody believes they're really making a nuclear bomb, or why?
Well, not necessarily make a nuclear bomb, but certainly acquire the capacity to make one. No, there's absolutely no doubt about that they've been doing it for a long, long time, and we've, you know, the highly conservative organization, the International Atomic Energy Agency, finally before Christmas came out and said, well, we think they are, you know, and there is evidence to support that they are.
But Jonathan, you can enrich uranium for nuclear power and isotopes and health research and all of that.
Well, and they've gone, but I mean, I think what the IAEA said, the agency said, that they've gone well beyond that capacity. They've clearly acquired or are acquiring the capacity to enrich uranium to the point that could be used for nuclear weapons.
Who has the power to go in and look? And I'm thinking weapons of mass destruction. Like, who is that? The United Nations? Who can actually say to the leaders in Iran, we're coming in to see if you're really playing around in the nuclear plant?
Yeah. Well, no, because at the moment, of course, there's a big schism because the Iranian government has refused to go along with previous demands by the United Nations, by the IAEA. So there's not much information coming out through sort of formal inspections at the moment. And as we know, also, Iran has set up all sorts of other nuclear development facilities that it hasn't acknowledged until they've been discovered, and then they said, oh, yes, well, yeah, there is that facility at Qom, which I'm sorry, we forgot to tell you about
that one.
Forgot about
yes.
that one. Yeah.
So the nuclear scientists, 4 assassinations, Iranians, Iranian-born.
Yeah.
Who's killing them?
Oh, I think one has to think it is on behalf of the Israeli government. You know, if you see an animal about that size and it's black and it's got fur and it goes meow, it's usually a cat. This has all the indications that it's an Israeli operation. Probably not using Israelis to plant the bombs on the cars in Tehran, probably using some of the many violent dissident groups in Iran. One in particular is pointed at is the Islamic Mujahideen of Iran, which has had a long history of violent attacks against the government in Iran. I don't know that for sure, but that's where a lot of the fingers are pointed. You know, I personally don't approve of killing anybody for whatever reason, but one has to say from a pragmatic point of view, this is a very cost-effective way of dealing with Israel's problem, because I mean, Israel sees itself, from what Iranian politicians have seen, as a prime target if Iran gets a bomb.
But Israel has nuclear weapons.
Yes. Oh, absolutely.
So that's even worse.
Yeah.
Considering that if they both have nuclear weapons.
Absolutely. No, I mean, but, well, where the real difficulty comes in the terms of the Middle East is that I think while most Arab countries know that Israel's bomb is purely defensive, they're not so sure about Iran's bomb. And I think if Iran visibly got a bomb, that you would see Saudi Arabia, you would see Egypt, you'd certainly see Turkey, see many other major Middle Eastern countries wanting to get their own nuclear weapons. And we've already seen a huge development of interest in at least nuclear industries of one sort or another in the Middle East in the last few years.
Pakistan has nuclear weapons.
Pakistan has nuclear weapons.
So this covert war, as they're calling it, to decapitate Iran's nuclear development program. Perhaps Israel, you say most likely, behind it, USA.
I doubt it. The US officials have been very vehement in their denials of involvement in this. And, you know, this isn't evidence, but those denials have the ring of truth. You know, when you've been hung around government officials from various governments for as many years as I have, there's a smell test. This one sort of passes the smell test.
Well, I watched Secretary of State Hillary Clinton respond to it, and either she's a very good actor,
which is
or
not beyond,
which is
not beyond
an option. But no, it seems to me, I don't know, because I have no idea what's going on in the Secret Service.
Yeah. Well, certainly, you know, if one looks at the anonymous officials who have been quoted, and you know, there are very few secrets are kept in the U.S. Administration for very long. Certainly, what one sees in the New York Times, the Washington Post, Los Angeles Times, they certainly seem to think that there is not U.S. involvement in these particular killings. As we know, the U.S. is involved in killings in Pakistan and elsewhere, but not in this one.
But as other countries stonewall Iran, it will come to a peak, I would think. Well,
there's a peak approaching, which is there are elections for the Iranian parliament in March. And we have an interesting confrontation coming along, which I think you and I have talked a bit about before, between the president, Mahmoud Ahmadinejad, and the supreme ayatollahs, and particularly the supreme leader, Ali Khamenei. Now, the ultimate power is with Khomeini, the Ayatollah. He has control of the Revolutionary Guards and so on. But Ahmadinejad seems to be challenging him for some authority. And so you've got this sort of tussle going on in the background here. And that could come unstuck quite heavily. The Ayatollahs, one of their powers is the power to select and approve candidates for the elections for the parliament, for religious probity and all these sort of things. And it will be interesting to see how many people who are seen as Ahmadinejad loyalists are allowed to run as candidates in the election.
I see.
And also, of course, when these sanctions begin to bite, there's going to be an internal blame game. You know, who is responsible for all this economic damage that is being done to the country? And there will be economic damage.
Absolutely, hit them in the pocketbook.
Absolutely.
Jonathan Manthorpe, our guest, international affairs columnist, foreign correspondent for a few years. You can read him in the Vancouver Sun and other newspapers you're syndicated, right?
Yes, yeah, right across.
Okay, we'll come back.